Hi everyone, Bill Duvendak here with another class, and this one is on creating sacred space. Now, we're going to look at this from a couple different perspectives. The first perspective that we are going to use is that of standard magical and energetic house cleaning. So that's going to be the perspective where it's something that you do all the time in the name of maintenance, keeping your space free of influences, but also attracting what you want into your life. Now, the other perspective that we are going to talk about in this class is that of creating sacred space for any spiritual ceremonies that you may be interested in performing. A lot of times people want to do different spiritual ceremonies, but they're not sure how to go about it. So this class is going to offer a lot of ideas on how to create sacred space so you can work with spiritual themes and beings in a very safe, clean way, promoting the greatest growth and good of all. So it sounds like a lot, but it's really not, because there are so many intersecting ideas and intersecting techniques and intersecting approaches that we can get through it pretty easily. Now, right off the bat, let's talk about the image on the screen. That is a picture of the Native American cultural tradition of smudging. Specifically, that kind of sage, which is what's predominantly used in it, is California white sage. It's not desert sage. Now, the reason I point that out is simply because we say Native American, but that implies that all tribes everywhere did it, and that's not true. Some tribes did it, and it was prevalent enough that the practice has been continued to this day and has even grown in popularity, but not all native tribes did it. And some of the ones that did it used the California white sage that you see here on the screen, while others used desert sage, which, as you can tell from the name, would have been the kind of sage that grew in the desert. And still other tribes used different combinations of herbs altogether and didn't use sage for a variety of reasons. For some of them, it was simply because sage did not grow in their dominant areas. For others, yes, they would use sage, but they would use juniper and cedar just as much. Now, you can see that also the person is holding a feather. That feather is to fan the smoke or fan the flames of the end of the sage bundle, and the mechanism here carries the smoke, which carries the intention to the finer planes, or to the heavens as it's sometimes called. And then finally we see the shell that is being held, and that is an abalone shell. And this is where things get fun. Bear with me. There's a reason why I'm breaking all this down. So this abalone shell catches the ashes and catches some of the leaves from the California white sage that's being burned here. Oftentimes people that smudge on a regular basis will use the same shell for years on end. As a matter of fact, the abalone shell that I use predominantly, I've had for approximately probably 17, 18 years at this point. So it's pretty common for people to do that. So why did I break it all down? It's an image. You can see what it is. You can see why and how it works. Well, the reason I broke it down is because I got annoyed a long time ago with people saying there is a correct way to smudge. You need this, this, and this to smudge. Quite honestly, that's bullshit. There are a lot of different ways you can smudge. The main factors are what I'm going to break down for you now. Number one, let's start off with whatever herbs you burn to sage. As many of you know that work with herbs and oils and incenses, they all have correspondences. So when you're cleansing a space, you can use sage. And in addition to being a cultural phenomenon, sage also has a lot of spiritual value for those that work with native teachings and techniques, but it depends on what you're doing. Sage is effective because it cleanses a place, an item, a person of negativity. But recent science has proven that sage also kills 99% of all airborne bacteria. So it's actually got physical health reasons to use it as well. Now, the cynic in me must say, if you know someone that's allergic to sage, that's pretty much all you need to know about them. But even take that statement with a grain of salt. So you've got whatever herbs you want to use to smudge. Now, as you can see in the picture, the person is using it as a bundle, but you can also burn them loosely. And if you do that, then you would be burning them in the abalone shell that's right there. Or sometimes to sage, you can burn the particular herbs that you want to use based on their correspondences over an open fire. So if you're going camping, you can throw the sage in your campfire to cleanse the area, or you can burn it on charcoal tablets. Now, the abalone shell in this picture actually does require a little bit of explanation. Sage is a dry leaf plant, which means when you're smudging, if you're not careful, as you're walking around the room honoring the directions and the spirits that dwell there, sometimes the dry leaf will fall from the bundle and it will not extinguish itself before it hits the floor. And if you've got carpet, well, now you have holy carpet. So an abalone shell or a cauldron or whatever container you want serves the very safe function of catching the ashes so that they don't destroy the flippin' floor. And that would be something that you're responsible for. So do you need to have an abalone shell? No. And as a matter of fact, the last time I checked a couple of years ago, the abalone was now endangered. The size of the abalone shells that are being retrieved from the ocean are much smaller on average than the ones you see in the picture. And the reason for this is they're being over harvested for their shells for fucking smudging. So really think through what you want to use. Is something natural always preferred? Well, yeah, but if you don't have access to it, then don't sweat it. You could use a cast iron cauldron if you wanted to. But you want something under it to catch it so you don't leave holes in your floor. Now, by that same token, if that's not a concern of yours, then don't even worry about having something catch it at all. Now, the feather, here again, requires a little bit of discussion. The first thing is that it's used to fan the smoke. So if you want to smudge and you don't have a feather, don't flip and worry about it. Use your hand. Something else to consider is, yes, birds have correspondences, just like animals do, or all animals, as I'm sure you know. So you can narrow it down to particular birds and the feathers from them you want to use to fan the smoke. But if you don't want to do that, don't flip and worry about it. Just use a feather. It really doesn't matter. As long as it works for you, there is no right way or wrong way to do it. So this picture was literally worth about 1,000 words over the last 10 minutes because I wanted to break down some misconceptions right off the bat. And I do this, number one, to make smudging more accessible for you. And number two, to let you know if somebody says you have to have this, you have to have this, you have to have this, no, you flip and don't. Use the tools you've got available. Use what speaks to you as long as you're doing it in a safe fashion. That's all, and effective. That's all that matters. Now, the final thing I want to say is simply that I just broke this down from a Native American perspective. If you're not in North America or South America, then you probably want to look up and do your research to see what herbs and what incenses and what resins are used in your area by the indigenous people, or what folklorists talk about, or what traditions say to use in that given area. For example, I spend a good amount of time in Europe, and when I'm over there, sometimes I use California white sage, sometimes I don't. I have found I have a stronger connection using sage if I'm on North America, but I can use it in Europe in a pinch, but I'd rather find out what herbs and resins were used by the people in that area because it promotes a stronger connection with the land. So in other words, if you're living in like Australia and sage is just not used there and there's a different herb that's used there instead, then use that other herb. Don't feel like you have to use sage. Smudging is the process. Sage is simply what's used by Native Americans. You can tailor make the herbs to your choice. All right, let's continue. Before we get started in depth, there are a lot of points to know. The first thing, point number one, it is a subjective practice, and that's what I was talking about on the previous screen. Adjust it to what works for you. As long as you are clear that when you are smudging or when you are creating sacred space, you're getting rid of unwanted influences, then that's really all you need to know. Everything else is up to your choice. The second point on the screen I put in just for fun. Do you want to understand how to create sacred space? Study how to clean your flipping house. It took me years to get this point. I mean, I lived alone for most of my life. So you kind of fall in those habits where cleaning is a choice rather than something you feel like should be done. Now, having said that, the older I get, the more I understand the connection. If you want to have a clean house, a clean space energetically, then clean your flippin' house. Clean your flippin' space. If you are doing energetic maintenance like this on a regular basis, then it's not that hard to do. But if you're one of those people who never cleans your space and you wonder why your rituals or ceremonies aren't working, that's why. It's because you're not cleaning your space. Or if you don't clean your space often and you've noticed that friends that used to come around on a regular basis no longer come around, it's because you don't clean your space. If you want an energetically clean space, then have a physically clean space. And that is the segue into point 3. As above, so below, as within, so without. If you want higher vibrational beings or non-physical beings to visit you in your physical space, then you want your physical space to be conducive and comfortable for them to inhabit. As within, so without takes this idea and puts a slight twist on it. Because the twist that it puts on it is that if you want a physical space that's clean, then internally within you, you should be clean. So what does being clean internally mean? Well, the first thing that it means is whenever you're creating sacred space, it's smart to not have any ideas of guilt or self-doubt present. If you've got any emotional or spiritual unresolved baggage, then get it in order before you create sacred space. Now, if we're talking about cleaning your space on a regular basis, more than actual rituals or ceremonies, then when you're physically cleaning your house, dump all of that emotional gunk and that mental gunk and that spiritual gunk into your cleaning. Something I've done for years is the more pissed off I am, the more my house gets clean. It started off 20 some odd years ago when I would get angry at something, and every time I got angry, I washed the dishes. And then it just grew from there. Whenever something gets me mad, I clean. What else am I going to do with that energy? Sit around and fester in it? Yeah, that's healthy. So consider that. If you want a spiritually clean space outwardly, then you yourself internally have to be spiritually clean. Now, this does not mean you have all of your quandaries settled and that you are 100% rock solid internally and nothing throws you off. We're all human. We've all got issues. We've all got baggage. So if you are waiting until that time that you don't have any of that, I'll tell you right now, you're going to be waiting until you're flipping dead. Because that's the whole reason we're in physical form, is to learn how to work through all this stuff. What I'm talking about here is having a handle on it, having a grip on it. Knowing that, okay, yes, I'm mad, but I do not have my adrenaline flowing because of it. Or knowing that, yes, I'm sad, but given what I just went through, it's understandable to be sad. But even though I'm sad, I don't let it dictate my perspective on things. I don't let it dictate my actions. You recognize the emotions without losing yourself to them. The next point is pretty self-explanatory, and it kind of ties into what we've been talking about so far. Cleanliness happens on all levels. You can have a physically clean home and be an emotional wreck. You can be clean emotionally and have a dirty home. You could be the best person on the planet when it comes to using logic and rationale and reason and all things related to the mind, and have dirty emotions. You could be spiritually centered, rock solid, nothing phases you, nothing touches you, and not use logic at all, and have out of sort emotions, and have a dirty house. When we're talking about creating sacred space, we're talking about being clean on all possible levels. Being physically clean, being emotionally clean, being mentally clean, being spiritually clean. So right there, you can see that this is an ongoing process. This is we're going to have our hands full. If you constantly strive for an ideal perfection of 100%, you are always going to fall short. Rather, the true pearl of wisdom, the true gem from the teaching, as it were, is simply that the more you strive for it, the better you become overall. Don't expect to reach some sort of ending point in a race, but rather strive to do your best each and every day on those 4 levels, on the physical, on the emotional, on the spiritual, and in your mind. Focus on that. Focus on doing your best each day. Just be careful that you don't fall into that psychological trap of thinking that there is an end goal or end destination that you need to reach. Because that end destination is called death. And we all die someday. It's better to enjoy the process of improving ourselves now. And understand that by being mindful and being aware of these things, we are creating our personal and spiritual growth in more proactive ways than 90% of the planet. The next point I've already touched on, make it a regular practice. I know some people that the only time their house gets clean is when they're getting ready to do some sort of spiritual ritual or ceremony. So then you can imagine if they only do a ritual or a ceremony once or twice a month, their house is never clean. Or if they only do a ritual or a ceremony once a month or once every 2 months, then they're living in filth. Make sacred space creation and spiritual and energetic cleaning as regular of a thing as you do physical cleaning. And there are all kinds of ways that you can weave the two together. One of my favorites is simply when you're getting ready to wash your floors, and this is a trick I learned from Hoodoo. When you're getting ready to wash your floors, put some Florida water in with your cleaning water. Florida water has long been used as an energetic cleaning agent, and this is one of the ways that it's been used. Something else you could do is use particular essential oils that are not harmful to the surface and dump those in there if you want those properties in your home. So, for example, if you've got 3 kids and all of them are teenagers or preteens, and you want to start teaching everybody to be calmer in general when they come home, then dump some lavender essential oil in with the cleaning water. Lavender is great for calming things down. Then clean your floors. Some people will use rose water, and they'll mix it in with their water to invite in love. I'm sure you see here all of the different ways you can approach doing this. And I give you these just as an example of how to weave the spiritual in with the practical. A lot of people suffer a disconnect from that. And that is one of the biggest disservices you can do, is think that the two are disconnected, because they're very much not. And finally, and I gave you a hint at this just a few seconds ago, law of attraction and sympathetic magic. That is a fancy way of talking about if you want to promote love in your home or in your space, then when you wash your floors, wash it with rose water. Or burn rose essential oil in your space to invite in theories of situations of people having to do with love. That's what sympathetic magic and law of attraction is talking about here. And while I use love as an example, I mean, you can extrapolate this out to whatever subject you want to work with. In today's world, there are so many sources for correspondences and references of different plants and oils and herbs and incenses and animals and how they correspond to different ideas that we all work with. There should be no problem to find the right correspondence to address whatever it is you want to promote within your own space. The fun is actually in the experimentation and in the research. You don't know what you don't know. If you know, hey, I want to bring order to my life, well, you know what? I bet there's an essential oil for that. If there's not, there's a Bach flower remedy for it. So experiment with this. Have fun with it. When we're talking about creating sacred space, a lot of people think that the only time you do that is when you're going to do a ritual or a ceremony like we were talking about before, but that's not true. Every day we create sacred space. Our life is a sacred space. The biggest physical thing that gives us sacred space is our body. I'm sure you are familiar with the phrase, the body is a temple, or my favorite, the body is an amusement park. The body is sacred space. Your skin is your boundaries. Start off with that and then radiate out from there. This is one of the reasons why a lot of times when people are talking about doing magical rituals or spiritual practices, they always say do it sober. The body should be purified and cleansed. Sometimes people will do spiritual fasts. Traditionally, in the Western esoteric tradition, before somebody did a ritual, they were supposed to bathe, and there were guidelines for that too. Something that's commonly done today is people will eat all natural foods, staying away from foods with preservatives before they're doing a spiritual practice. It's all about purifying the body and purifying the mind. And you can see that that's kind of a major teaching in between the lines here. Purify the body, purify the mind, purify your physical space, whether your physical space is your body or the place you live or both. That's how you raise your vibration. people love to talk about raising your vibration, but they never talk about what raising your vibration means and how to do it. Well, this is how you do it. Because as you do this on a regular basis, as you create sacred space on a regular basis, it elevates your consciousness. It shifts your attention and your focus to things that are better for you. And as you're constantly doing it, you're constantly growing. The only thing you want to be careful of is that as you're constantly growing and as you're constantly moving forward, that you still have your feet under you and you still have a solid, firm foundation to build from. You definitely do not want a foundation built of quicksand. You want it built of marble or granite. And we'll talk about how to get that later on. I hope this is making sense so far. I like to start off with the broad specific points before we get into the nitty-gritty details, and that's where we're going to go now. So from here on out until the end, we're going to break things down by the planes: the physical, the emotional, the mental, and the spiritual. So, the physical plane. I say it all right off the bat. Does this even need to be said? I mean, really, the physical plane? We just got done talking about the necessity of cleaning your physical space in order to create sacred space, whether it is for a rare instance or occurrence like a ceremony or a ritual, or whether it is just daily or weekly maintenance. Long story short, and I'm sure you've heard this before, if you want to call high vibrational beings such as angels or spirits into your space, they're not going to come to you if you're living in filth and swill. You got to have a clean space. Now, I realize that a lot of you may live with other people, and therefore you only have control over a certain part of your physical space, and that's quite all right. Maintain to the best of your abilities cleanliness in the space that you have control over. That's enough to attract the kind of energies that you want. It's all about your immediacy, but it's also all about you putting forth the effort to attract things that are better for you so that you can change your circumstances later on and give more. Now, the next couple points are related. I've got listed incenses and oils. Now, you could also put herbs on that list. I didn't, because 9 times out of 10, most incenses and most oils come from herbs, or in the case of dragon's blood, they come from tree sap or resin of some kind. That's also true of copal. But then you also have the sweet holy wood of Palo Santo, where it's an actual wood. But I'm pretty sure if you're familiar with these things already, you know that these 3 categories, incenses, oils, and herbs, are all intertwined. The reason I point that out is because you may find that using dragon's blood incense is not the way you want to go, but you'd rather use dragon's blood oil. Well, then feel free to do it. Mix and match. So for incenses, I listed some of the common ones that are used to create sacred space. Sage, which we talked about earlier. Dragon's blood, which is good for purification and exorcism. Palo Santo, which is good for purification, but it's also good for inviting in prosperity. The classic frankincense and myrrh. I realize that some people listening to this may have an issue using frankincense and myrrh because those two have been used extensively by Christianity and the Catholic Church for the last 2,000 years. So if you have had any kind of negative experiences with the church, then smelling these might leave a bad taste in your mouth. Pun intended. And I understand that. But I put them in here because the church got them and their uses from ancient Egypt. So as much as it's Catholic and Christian in usage, it actually comes from ancient Egypt. Copal is generally found and used extensively in Central and South America. In the last 60 years or so, it has made its way up to North America, and it has spread out across the world the more we are getting interconnected with the global culture. So it's starting to get more widespread use and recognition from a planetary perspective. So don't be surprised if you see it where you might not have seen it before. Now, oils, if you'll notice, I have oils listed here, not with particular oils for the reason that I just mentioned about herbs, oils, and incenses all being kind of blended together. But rather, I wanted to focus on the different ways to use oils. Now, one of them we already talked about, the floor washes. You can use oils as long as they're safe to be handled and they're safe for whatever surface you're going to put them on. You can put oils in your floor washes, and feel free to do so. Something else you can do are use oil diffusers, whether it's an aromatherapy lamp, whether it's potpourri. You can use potpourri, and I'm really surprised that more people I know that work with this kind of spirituality don't use potpourri, because you can use potpourri. One of my favorite diffusers is one that you plug into a wall outlet, and it has basically a little cotton swab ball or piece of cloth on it, and when you plug it into the outlet, then the diffuser itself heats that fabric, and that activates the oil. So there's no muss, no fuss. It used to be oil diffusers needed a candle and it needed a bowl of water. So what you would do is you would light the candle would be under the bowl of water, you would put drops of oil in the water, and it would just burn out and evaporate into the air. But in the last 15 years or so, this industry has really taken off to produce a lot of different kind of diffusers. I've even seen oil diffusers that use a USB jack, so you can just plug it into your computer. I've seen some that are for the lighter, for a cigarette lighter in a car. You just plug it in where you would plug a cigarette lighter in. So there's a lot of flexibility with oil diffusers now. And these are great alternatives for people that may be sensitive to incense smoke. They're great alternatives for people that may live in a place that don't allow you to burn incenses, or maybe there is very sensitive smoke detectors. I know a lot of people that want to keep their space clear at the office where they work in corporate culture, and they can't burn sticks of incense, so they'll get oil diffusers, and they'll get the ones I'm talking about that you plug into a computer or you plug into an outlet. And they're just very mindful of the amount of oil they use to keep the scent very light. Now, in the last 5 years or so, what has become popular are simply bottles of water with the oil mixed in, so they're sprays. Those have been popular too, and they have been slowly replacing oil diffusers because they're more portable, that works off the same premise, but they're also subtler. And since the oil is carried on water, it generally evaporates, so it's not as strong, and it leaves no mess. So there's a lot of different ways you can use oils now. And like I said, they're great alternatives to incense. So if you're saying, well, I don't burn sage because of the smoke, well, use an oil instead. That's how you get around that problem. Now, if you try the oil and you still have an allergic reaction to it, well, then that's another story. Now, I point this out because I know a lot of people that say, well, I'm allergic to sage, so I don't smudge. You know, that's about the worst thing you can do. It really is, because you're basically saying, since this one technique does not work, I'm not going to do anything. I'd rather play the victim. Please. If Sage doesn't work, right there on the screen in front of you are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 other ideas, not counting the ones that we've talked about thus far in the class. So if Sage doesn't work, try Dragon's Blood. Dragon's Blood doesn't work, Palo Santo. Palo Santo doesn't work, Copal. And there's like a bajillion different Copals. If that doesn't work, frankincense. If that doesn't work, myrrh. If that doesn't work, try the two together. If those don't work, cedar, juniper, mugwort. There are so many different ones. I know a lot of people that make their own smudging bundles, and they put their own herbs in, whether they grew them themselves or whether they're just making a blend that they can't get store-bought. The older I get, the more allergic I am to frankincense, and therefore a frankincense and myrrh blend, because I've worked with it so much over the last 15 to 20 years that I've just inundated my senses and they can't tolerate it anymore. So I've been using more Dragon's Blood. It drives me crazy because I'd rather use frankincense and myrrh for the Egyptian connection, but I love Dragon's Blood, so I'll use that too. California White Sage, I'll use that as well. I share this because I want you to know if you're allergic to one of these, that is not an excuse or a cop-out to not do any of them. Play with it. Find one that works. Because if you're playing that victim mentality, woe is me card, then you're not going to have much success when it comes to spiritual and personal development. Sorry, that's just the way it is. Now, semi-precious gemstones and gem elixirs are the next point on the list, and they require a little bit of a discussion too. The first thing I'm pointing out here is simply that if you want to create sacred space, you can use gemstones. I know people that will have a big piece of amethyst in a room to cleanse that space of any unwanted energy. Amethyst is known as the stone of sobriety. I also know people that will keep a piece of selenite in a space. Selenite helps get rid of negativity in a room. It also helps bring in higher vibrational beings and ideas such as love and compassion and harmony and trust and fellowship and things like that. Now, like the herbs, there's about a bajillion different gemstones, and all of them have different correspondences. So you're probably going to want to do your research and use the stones that are appropriate to what you are working with. If you are creating sacred space for a ceremony or a ritual, then you would pull the semi-precious gemstones out and use them just for that time period and put them away when you're done. But the use of semi-precious gemstones on a regular basis is a great way to give your physical space energetic maintenance in a way that does not take a lot of effort from you. Long story short, if you have a room that's got 2 or 3 pieces of amethyst in it, the amethyst is always doing its thing. So when you walk into it, that sacred space is created. You can use semi-precious gemstones in conjunction with one another. So, for example, I was talking about amethyst and selenite. You can use them both in the same room on the same regular ongoing basis, and feel free to do so. Now, like herbs, semi-precious stones do come with some warnings. It depends on the stone, so you want to do your research, but let me give you some examples. The 2 that come to mind are citrine and amethyst, for example number 1. If you leave both of those exposed to sunlight, it will fade the color. So if you're going to decorate a room because you want it to be your spiritual sanctuary, and you decide you want to use amethyst, don't put it on a window ledge. Put it someplace in a darker corner where you don't have to worry about it fading, because it will fade. I have seen amethyst bleached almost clear before. And the same is true of citrine. Citrine will fade in the sunlight as well. This is also true of ametrine, the naturally occurring blend of amethyst and citrine. This is also true of fluorite and dozens of other stones that are in that chatoyant translucent category. They will fade in sunlight, so don't leave them there. Selenite has a different kind of warning that is something you should be mindful of. If you put selenite in water, or if you get selenite wet, it dissolves. So don't run it under running water to cleanse it. It is a stone that you want to energetically cleanse using incense smoke or using oil that has been burned in a diffuser. Now, there's another stone that I'm going to use as an example that's going to give us a segue into the gem elixirs, and that is the stone of malachite. So, malachite, if you get it wet, is toxic over an extended period of time or taken in large doses. Therefore, you do not want to use malachite in a glass of drinking water and drink it on a regular basis. It'll make you sick, and with long-term, prolonged exposure, it will have serious health consequences. Gem elixirs are when you take a gem, you drop it in a container of water that you keep in your refrigerator or maybe your favorite drinking cup. And whenever you drink water from that container, you're getting the properties of that stone. I do this a lot with amethyst. I also do it a lot with shungite, which is a master healing stone. I know people that will charge a piece of clear quartz and they'll do it with clear quartz. There's a lot of different gems out there that people make elixirs out of. Earlier, I was talking about cleaning yourself internally before beginning spiritual ceremonies and rituals. Well, this is one of the ways you can do it. You can drink a gem elixir before you start the ceremony or the ritual. Or, as I was doing with shungite, you just drink the gem elixir on a regular basis to where you're constantly promoting that health and healing energy. So gem elixirs are very, very versatile. But you want to do your research to make sure that the stone you're thinking about using for the elixir is safe to be in water. In the case of malachite, it could be toxic to you. Or, in the case of some other stones, it would dissolve in the water, such as selenite. So you would not make a gem elixir of selenite. Now, what you can do instead, though, is if you have a container that is an insert into a larger container, you can put the stones in between the two containers. So you're still having that energy charged through. You're just not getting exposed to the toxicity. I've seen some people tape gemstones to their water bottles to get the effects of the stone without worrying about the toxicity coming from the stone. Or in the case of selenite, the stone dissolving and then you're drinking liquid selenite. So there's a lot of different ways that you can look at gem elixirs. You can look at them as an ongoing thing, like we've been talking about with the regular preventative maintenance that you do for your home on the physical level, keeping the energy clear. Or you can treat it as something special that you pull out for the religious and spiritual rituals and ceremonies that you do every now and then, in which case you would use it to purify your inner self. So that's another way to look at it too. But for those of you that don't know what gem elixirs are, there you go. There's your down and dirty 101. Something else you can do with semi-precious gemstones that are not listed on the screen is you can put them in particular patterns known as crystal grids, or sometimes it's called gridding. And the particular patterns and shapes have effects that they fill that space and therefore fill you with. So you can do gemstone grids as well. And here again, there's two different ways to do it. One way you can do it is you can have a crystal grid set up on an ongoing basis for a particular goal or intention. Or when you go to do a religious or spiritual ritual or ceremony, then you could pull out a crystal grid and set it up just for that and take it down when you're done. So have fun with crystal grids. I'm a huge fan of crystal grids. I've been working with them for the last 15 years, and it just makes my heart sing that in the last 3 to 4 years, there is a lot more material coming out about it, and it's gaining traction because crystal grids are flipping awesome. Religious holy symbols. I've got this listed on the physical plane, but you could just as easily say that this belongs with the spiritual plane. I've got it listed here because it touches on a very basic idea in this context, which is have yourself surrounded by your religious holy symbols. You know, if you're a Christian, have a cross or a crucifix on the wall. If you work with any of the nature-based spirituality systems, such as Neopaganism, then have a pentagram or a pentacle on your wall. The more we inundate our conscious and subconscious minds with the religious holy symbols that apply to us, the more we are ingraining and training our mind to be focused on things that make us better as people and better as spirits. So is this promoting being surrounded by your own personal religious holy symbols? Yes. Is this promoting one particular religion? No. These are holy symbols that mean something to you. They don't have to mean something to anyone else. Is there a lot to be said for symbols that are used by a lot of people instead of symbols that are just used by you? Well, yeah, sure. But if you don't roll that way, then that's fine. This is a highly subjective point as well. You define what religious holy symbols work for you. Just understand that when you've got them physically represented in your space, you're inundating your consciousness and your subconscious with their energies. So then what that means is you are ingraining and training your mind. And that's where the true power lies. And then finally, and I'm sure I'm going to catch some flack from this, and that's quite all right with me, Himalayan salt lamps and candles. I think I'm going to catch a lot of flack for this because in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of discussion and controversy as to the actual effectiveness of Himalayan salt and Himalayan salt lamps. You've got one camp of people that say they produce a lot of negative ions in the air when they're activated, and that helps stimulate your pineal gland. The other camp of people say there's no evidence to support that, so it's all a marketing gimmick. As with most things in life, the truth lies somewhere in the middle. You can have a Himalayan salt lamp sitting in your personal space, but if you never turn it on, if you never activate it, you're not having any negative ions generated and put into the air. It's that simple. It's dormant. It's not working. So can you have a Himalayan salt lamp and not have any negative ions in the air? Yes, if you don't activate it. Now, a lot of people use Himalayan salt on their food. Really, I don't know where the research and the science stands on that. I don't know if that does help or not. I use it because if there's a possibility it's going to help, then I'd rather use that than iodized salt. So why the hell not? But do your own research. You know, maybe you're going to come across some information that I haven't, and factor it in. Now, the candles, though, candles are another story. I really don't think I'm going to catch much flack from candles, but of course, now that I said that, watch the karmic law kick in, and I probably will. I mean candles here more along the lines of the ones you pull out and use every now and then for your ritual and spiritual and religious ceremonies. Not necessarily the candles you have around your house burning on a regular basis. But I want to start off talking about those candles that you've got around your house that you burn on a regular basis. If you do a lot of spirit contact, whether it is channeling and mediumship work, and whether that is your own spirit guides or connecting with ancestors or people in spirit, using candle lighting is always better than fluorescent lighting or lighting produced from light bulbs. Candle flames and diffused lighting, such as oil lamps, will always bring through better spirit work. So whenever you get a chance to use them, then by all means do so. But not everybody is in a space to burn candles on a regular basis. And I totally understand that. So some people pull them out only for religious and spiritual rituals and ceremonies. And that's quite all right. You're going to have the same effectiveness with spirit when you do that. And the main thing you want to know with the candles is to use the color of the candles that aligns with what it is you're trying to accomplish. So, for example, if you're constantly exhausted and you want to get more energy, then use red candles. Black candles for discipline and banishing and getting rid of stuff, etc., etc., etc. I'm pretty sure if you don't know the correspondences to colors, you already know where to get them. For the sake of the class, though, we're talking about purification, and generally that is white or black or purple. Purple is a color, and this covers indigo. Purple and indigo are generally colors that have to do with bringing things in order, whether it's within yourself or in your own life. Purple and indigo also correspond to rituals and ceremony because it's all about self-discipline. So black, white, purple are the main ones if you want to just good all-around colors to use for whatever it is that you want to clean. But you can get more specific with a lot of the different colors if you so choose. Yes, this is very brief when it comes to the physical plane, but one of the reasons for it is because it kind of depends on your spiritual paradigm. If your spiritual path is Christian, then frankincense and myrrh will apply, and maybe the others won't. And that means your holy symbols are a cross or a crucifix. It's easy to find out that information. But if you are a follower or a believer of a spiritual system that's kind of obscure, then it may be harder to get the information, and your list of items might look radically different from what's on the screen. So yes, it's subjective, but this is also a reason and motivation for you to do your homework. Find out what all of these things are in your own spiritual path. And if you're of the attitude that you make up your own spiritual path, well, then treat this like a checklist and make your own correspondences. Regardless, let's move on to the emotional plane. Whether it's an ongoing thing or whether it is for a ritual or ceremony that you do occasionally, Emotionally center yourself. Still the mind. Quiet the thoughts. Bring your emotions under control. One of the worst things you can do is go into a ritual or a ceremony with your emotions all out of sorts, because it means that you're not focused on what you're doing, and that sets the stage for problems. So always, always, always emotionally center yourself to the best of your abilities. I am not an emotional healthcare professional, so I can't really go into detail about this. I do know plenty of people that have emotional issues and they're seeing therapists for it though. So if you're in a spot where you need to see a professional because you can't do it on your own, then do that. But if you can handle this on your own, then do that too. In the Western esoteric tradition and occultism, one of the worst things you can do is do something when you are emotionally off center. Point 2, I always throw in because it's such common sense and yet so few people actually pay attention to it. In my book, Psychic Protection, I wrote about this a decent amount. Our physical forms are mostly water. Therefore, water helps. Whether we're talking about sacred space creation on a regular basis, or whether we're talking about sacred space creation that you only do for spiritual and religious rituals and ceremonies, drink lots of water. It's really that simple. Oftentimes, symptoms of dehydration mask themselves as symptoms of depression. There's reason number 1 to drink water. You know someone's constantly depressed? Find out the water intake. If they say they never drink water and they only drink soda or energy drinks, then they're not always constantly depressed. They're flipping dehydrated. If you ever wonder if you are off emotionally, before you go straight to assuming you're depressed, increase your water intake for a day or 2. See how it changes your mood. I can tell you from personal experience, it will have an effect. Therefore, water helps. Now, I'm talking about drinking water here for your own spiritual and personal well-being, but water is also the conduit in between the planes. And the reason I point that out is because you can use water in your rituals and ceremonies to carry your message to the unseen realms in much the same way that we talked about using incense smoke before. So you can incorporate it in the form of a fountain, or maybe like you've seen in movies or churches where it's holy water. And I'll let you in on a little secret, you can make your own. And you sprinkle that holy water on the object of your desire. So incorporate water. And have fun with it. It's flipping water. We're almost aquatic beings. I mean, 75% of us is aquatic. Let's have some fun here with it. Music. Music, music, music. I don't even know where to start with this. Again, right off the bat, talking about music is highly subjective. Part of it depends on your tradition and culture, and part of the subjectivity simply has to do with what kind of music you prefer. But I've got some guidelines here. So let's talk about the guidelines. Number 1, if we're talking about a religious or spiritual ritual or ceremony that you only do occasionally, then you want to choose music that matches your own spiritual tradition. This music should be lyricless unless the lyrics match your intention. music can be kind of a sticky subject for a lot of reasons. Number one, some people think, well, I'm not a musician. Well, you don't have to be. Welcome to the 21st century. We got computers that can play off of a USB jump drive. We got CD players. Some people still got 8 tracks and cassette players and LP players. We've got easy access to whatever music we want. You just want it in line with your spiritual tradition. So, for example, if you work a lot with ancient Egyptian teachings, you would probably not want to incorporate Catholic and Christian hymns from the 19th century. You're just not going to get good results with that. Sorry. Ain't going to happen. If you work with a Celtic belief system, then African tribal drumming might not be a good fit. I'm sure you see where I'm going with this. Make the two line up. Music is one of the best ways to get the blood flowing. I'm pretty sure all of us have at least one song that we have an emotional, if not a spiritual connection with. That's how powerful music is. And that gives us the bridge into the next point, raise energy through ecstatic activities, such as singing, dancing, and chanting. Well, how do most people do that? To the background of music. We get a catchy tune in our head and we speak in rhythm to it. This is where the creative part really comes in. I'm pretty sure we've all seen the Disney movies or just movies in general where somebody's cleaning their house and they're whistling while they work. Yeah, can you tell? I think I need to drink more water because that was a horrible whistle. You get my point. Whether we're talking about the sacred space that you create on a regular basis just by cleaning your house and making it your personal sanctuary, or whether we're talking about the spiritual and religious rituals and ceremonies that we only do occasionally, raising energy is a major part of it. And I give you several ways to raise energy through right there. You can sing along. You can dance. I know plenty of people that dance while they clean. Heck, in this social media driven age, there's even the memes that talk about dance like no one is watching, but type like everything's being recorded. Chant. Whether it's a ritual, ceremonial setting, or whether it's the day-to-day chanting. A friend of mine introduced me to a very wonderful technique many years ago that I still do, and I love doing it. And that is simply that when you are weeding your garden, every time you pull up a weed, you name an enemy. So that when you are pulling up that weed and killing it, you're killing the enemy. Now, some people would say, well, that's dark, Bill. But in her case, they weren't necessarily always physical enemies. Sometimes it was pride. Sometimes it was the lower ego. Sometimes it was just obstacles that needed to be removed from the manifestation of her will. So here again, get creative with it. But that was her own chant that went with it. And finally, for the emotional plane, connect with your astral temple. For those of you that have ever participated in a guided meditation I've done, you know that I like to take people to their inner temple before beginning the rest of the meditation. The astral temple, also known as your inner temple, your inner sanctuary, your sanctum sanctorum, is your special sanctuary. It's that place that you go within you, that nobody can get you. You are there by yourself. You're safe, you're comforted, you're protected, you've got everything you need, and there are no limits. The more you do this, the stronger the connection gets. You just want to be careful that you don't do it so much you become delusioned. And you don't want to do it so much that you become dependent on it for success. But connecting with your astral temple is one of the best things you can do. So whether it's cleaning your house once a week, once every 2 weeks, and just simply mentally going to your temple beforehand, or whether it's taking 20 minutes to meditate with your astral temple before you begin your ritual or ceremony that you do once a month or once every couple of months, regardless, cultivate your astral temple. If this is a new idea to you, then this is your starting point. What's your astral temple look like? Where is it located? What is in it? Who do you allow in there? What do you allow in there? How's it look? How's it feel? How's it smell? What's it feel like to the touch? What's the scenery outside the window? Is there a window? When you're there, what tools are there? Whether spiritual complex tools or just things that you like to have there to amuse yourself. Is there an Xbox there? Is there a 56-inch 8K HD TV there? Is there electricity there? These are all different things to consider if this is the first time you're hearing it, so that you can build your temple. What's the function of the temple? Is it just a sanctuary, a retreat where you can go to get away from the day-to-day hustle and bustle of life? Or is this something that you only visit on certain occasions, and when you go there, it's an important visit? All this is up to you. So don't sweat it if you got no clue. Just play along and play along with it, play around with it, and just write things down in your journal as you go. Next, the mental plane. Rule number 1 of life: do the emotions, don't let them do you. Out of control emotions are public enemy number 1. When we're talking about the mental plane, we're talking about the mind. We're talking about logic, reason, rationale, scientific method of thinking, abstract thinking, math, science, engineering, technology. That means having your emotions mastered so that you can think clearly. Next point, easy enough, discipline your thoughts. Whether we're talking about a regular cleaning regimen or whether we are talking about the rituals and ceremonies you only occasionally do, in either case, stay focused on the task at hand. Let me reiterate. Stay focused on the task at hand. Don't let your mind wander. Focus on what you're doing. Be in the present. Be in the now. There's one exception to this, and the exception has to do with weekly or bi-weekly preventative maintenance that you do to keep your physical space sacred. That exception is sometimes you can use that physical activity as a moving meditation to clear your mind by letting it wander. But just before you begin getting to work, ask yourself, is this going to be a moving meditation, or is it going to be spiritual cleaning and creation of sacred space? And I know some of you out there will say, well, why can't it be both? And you're 100% right, it can be. But by asking yourself this question ahead of time, you are setting out your intention, you're clear about what you are doing, and then you're simply doing it. Next point, here again is pretty simple. Attune to your 5 senses. Whether regular cleaning or the occasional rituals and ceremonies. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you taste? What do you touch? What do you smell? And then finally, stay focused on your intention. Whether it's the daily cleaning that we're talking about, or whether it's the occasional ritual and ceremony, stay focused on your intention. So you can see that the whole major theme that runs through all 5 of these points is mental discipline. Stay focused. Don't wander. Don't spread your attention too thin. Stay singular in thought. And finally, we come to the spiritual plane. Spiritual banishings and space preparation. Let's just start off with that. In many different spiritual traditions, the idea of banishings exists. And this is as simple as it sounds. Getting rid of energies or things you don't want. In some traditions, these are very complex rituals. In other traditions, they're not complex at all. At the beginning of the class, we talked about smudging, using sage. Well, that is technically a banishing. It's a cleansing. Banishing means to get rid of. So it can be that simple. But let's look at it from a practical perspective. You know what else a banishing is? Shutting a door to the outside world. Turning off the computer. Turning off the smartphone. If you're getting ready to do some sacred space cleaning, maybe hanging up on the person you're talking with, politely of course, unless they just pissed you off. So banishings, while we have a tendency to think of them as very spiritual and very sacred, they can be as simple as closing the door and shutting off the computer. Now, let's take a minute to talk about space preparation. Space preparation is what you go through when you are creating sacred space. Whether it's the day-to-day cleaning, preventive maintenance we've been talking about, or whether it is the rituals and ceremonies that you only occasionally do, space preparation needs to be done. If it's the preventative maintenance cleaning, then the space preparation is simply getting out the mop and the bucket, making sure there's no stacks of paper on the floor that you're about to mop. But if we're talking about the rituals and the ceremonies that we only do occasionally, space preparation could be setting up the candles, arranging the altar, getting your incense ready, having all the appropriate tools and symbols at the ready. So it can take on a much different and more complex connotation. Here again, both these points are subjective. So there's not a lot I can tell you without leading you down the path of dogma. But the underlying principle here is whether it's spiritual banishings and space preparation, both or neither, then you want to do one of the two. And here's why. When you go through the actions of the banishings and or the space preparation, you are telling your consciousness, we're about to do something different. In the case of rituals or ceremonies that you don't do that often, then you're about to do something more special than normal. In the case of the energetic cleaning that you do once a week or once every couple of weeks, you're still about to do something special, but not in the same way as the ritual and ceremony. So make it a part of your regimen to do the banishings and the space preparation, if for no other reason, to train your consciousness to understand that it's about to slip into a different headspace. Next point, call in your guardians. This is more aimed at the occasional rituals and ceremonies that we do rather than the regular space clearing preventative maintenance. But it is as simple as it sounds. Call in your guardians. Each spiritual tradition has guardians that you can call on. In Christianity, the one that comes to mind is Archangel Michael and his flaming sword. In the Western esoteric tradition, it would be calling in the beings of the four elements. If you work a lot with semi-precious stones, it'd be calling in the stone guardians. Doesn't really matter. If you are a Pastafarian, one of your guardians could be the sink. After you've established that the space is sacred and different, then you call in your guardians to protect what you're doing. Some people see this as protecting themselves. Some people see it as protecting the ritual. Doesn't really matter how you see it. Just call them in. Think of it like insurance. You'd rather have them and not need them than not have them and need them. Next point, suit up and shut up. Mentally suit up for the working, which basically means get your head in the game. Go through your pre-task checklist to make sure everything's ready. And mentally shut up the mind, which is what we talked about before on the mental plane. Just make it a decisive action that you're going to shut up those thoughts. And then have the discipline and the wherewithal to follow through. Next point, define how this space is now different than it is in the day-to-day. And when you're done, reset it. So for the regular preventative maintenance, this is a fancy way of saying, while I'm cleaning, the floor's wet. Don't walk across a wet floor. And then when you're done, putting your cleaning tools away, that resets it to where it was before, except now it's cleaner. With regards to a ritual or a ceremony that's occasionally done, there's going to be a formal declaration done during that ceremony, or something subtler. But then, when you're done with the ritual or ceremony, resetting it is putting all the stuff back away. You don't just leave it out. And then finally, last point down there at the bottom, be proactive. And I've got two examples here. Example number 1 is actually the second one on the screen. Let's start with the astrological timing. Decide when you're going to do your sacred space creation. Is it going to be every full moon? Is it going to be every new moon? Are you even going to look at it astrologically? Is it going to be the first of the month? Where I live now, I always know when the landlords are getting ready to come around for rent, because that's when we clean the house. Or by that same token, if we know when the landlords are coming around for rent, we make sure to clean the house a little bit before. It has nothing to do with astrological timing. But if you time it with astrology, you're going to get bigger and better results. So keep that in mind as well. Now, let's bring our attention back to the first item on the list, Feng Shui. I could have led with Feng Shui at the beginning of this class, but quite honestly, I could have just done a class on Feng Shui. For those of you that are not familiar with the term, Feng Shui is a way of looking at your immediate environment and arranging things to produce maximum results. In Feng Shui, there is a tool called a Bagua map, and you can basically stand at the front door of your house, hold the map in front of you. It tells you what different corners and what different sections of your house mean different things. A lot of times you will see it referred to as like your prosperity quadrant, or your section of children, or your section of romance. And then you look to see how it's arranged in your space, and you make sure everything lines up for your greatest growth and good. Many years ago, I did this at the space that I was living in. And at the time, I was poor, let's just put it that way. And when we took the Bagua map and laid it out on the space, I discovered that my prosperity corner was always cluttered and I never took care of it. So the first thing I did was I gutted it. I took everything out of that corner. Now in Feng Shui, there's this whole system. It's a beautiful, elegant system, really. And I encourage you to look into it because it can really bring dynamic results. One of the components of the Feng Shui system is if the sector is a corner or it's hard angles, then there's not really much you can do about it physically speaking unless you want to rebuild your house. So there is a system known as cures, and you can use those cures to assuage the energy and soften the energy so that it flows better. So in my space, I had exactly that. I had hard angles. There was no way I could do anything about it physically. So I put a Feng Shui cure in that corner for prosperity. And the next day, I had a windfall of money. And from that point, going forward until now, the way, and this is going back 7 or 8 years, my relationship with money and prosperity has dramatically improved. So I cannot stress Feng Shui enough. And this is why it falls in the category of be proactive. If you're looking for a place to start with any of the themes that we've been talking about in this class, start off by researching Feng Shui and applying those principles to your living space and adapting from there. And even though I use a house as an example, you can do it with a room. For about 6 months of my life, many years ago, I lived in an 8-foot by 10-foot room. And one time I took a Bagua map at the front door, just like I explained, and I found out that my sector of children was where my cat's litter box was. On one hand, that was great fun because my cats were my kids. On the other hand, it also means I'm shitting on the possibility of children at that time. So, tomato, tomato, give an inch, take a mile. Meh, I left it the way it was. Didn't need the headache of kids anyway, especially since I was living in an 8-foot by 10-foot room. I offer this as an example that you can use Feng Shui for a room as much as you can a full building. So if you're thinking, well, this is limited. No, it's not. It's your imagination that's limited. And finally, for those of you that want to read more, bibliography for further reading list. I'm going to start with the book in the middle. The words of wisdom from Rocky come here. Always go for the one in the middle. Sacred Space by Denise Linn. That is the most comprehensive, thickest book on the subject I have seen. So if you had to pick one from that list to start with, I would encourage you to start with that one. The other two are more specific. Magical Housekeeping by Tess Whitehurst and The Magical Household by Scott Cunningham and David Harrington. They are more based on the regular preventative sacred space maintenance and predominantly from a nature-based spirituality system. So both of those have very strong neo-pagan views, and there's nothing wrong with that. You can part and parcel those with whatever you believe. But Sacred Space by Denise Linn is a little bit more general. So you can wet your feet with that and then come back to those two. I have all three books, and all three books are flippin' awesome. And then, of course, I'm going to put the caveat disclaimer at the bottom. Specialized books in your spiritual paradigm. Regardless of what your spirituality is, there's going to be specialized books that you can cannibalize and use in the name of sacred space creation. So do it. I don't know them all because I don't know all the spiritual paths that are out there. And even if I did know all the paths, you get 6 believers in a room, you're going to get 6 different perspectives on the same path. So there's no way I could be inclusive about that. The only thing I couldn't find when I was putting this list together is a good beginner book on Feng Shui. So you might have your work cut out for you on that point. But otherwise, if you want to take the teachings of this class to the next level and you want to take it a little bit further, here's your starting list. Anyway, I hope you have enjoyed this. I hope it's given you fresh perspectives on things. I hope it's filled in some gaps in things that you already knew and given you a direction to move forward. In the northern hemisphere, we're coming up on spring equinox, and I'm sure some of you are familiar with the phrase of spring cleaning, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this now. And of course, if you're in the southern hemisphere, you're coming up on autumn equinox. And what's interesting about that is that in traditional Chinese teaching, you wanted to do your cleanings in the autumn, not the spring. So even though I was raised with the term spring cleaning, and most of you are familiar with the term spring cleaning, and I understand the thought process behind it. It was a cold winter. Now you get to open the windows, do some cleaning, get some fresh air in there. You can just as effectively clean in autumn. Isn't that flippin' awesome? Anyway, I hope you have enjoyed this. Put it to work for you. Start making your own list of how you clean. If you want to know more, on my website, 418ascendant.com, there's a free PDF download of house cleaning tips. It's nowhere as in depth as this, but if you wanted something printed out and tactile to use as you walk around your house, feel free to start with that. Otherwise, I will see you in the digital world.